I recently heard a clip by Hancock about the crowns in Egypt, the ancient crowns, and I realised that I can actually answer some of the questions that probably go through people's mind about these crowns. So here's the recording of what Graham Hancock had to say, and then I'll explain.
So are the crowns of the pharaohs, which are said to radiate heat, and if not worn with proper protection beneath them, will burn themselves into the head of the wearer. As far as I'm aware, no ancient Egyptian crown has ever been found. Only images of the crowns and accounts of the power of the crowns. We see stone sculptures of the crowns and reliefs of the crowns, but we do not find the crowns themselves.
Sorry about the quality of that recording. It was from a lecture he did many years ago when he was on tour. So there's two key points that I want to talk about initially regarding the crowns. And one is the dangerous aspect of the crown. And the second thing is the fact that no crown has ever actually been found, just these stone renditions of a crown. And while I'm on the subject of crowns, I might also do a section on what the archaeologists have to say about these crowns versus what I have seen in my strange dreams regarding these crowns. So that's probably going to be another episode, but it's just the same kind of topic. But let's start with the dangers of the crowns. To talk about the dangers of the crowns, first of all, you have to understand that there were essentially two, let's say, sets of crowns. There was the set that was for the dynastic Egyptian royalty, and there were the various crowns that were worn, theoretically, by the gods. So the ones that are pictured on the heads of the gods, that's a whole different story, which I think I'm going to have to explain completely separately. But it's the ones that were worn by the actual dynastic royalty that we're going to be talking about. Now, I should note at this point that there is a bit of overlap between these two sets, as quite often you see some of the gods pictured wearing the crowns of the royalty. So, having identified the two groups, my next question is, was it the royal crowns or the godly crowns that were the dangerous ones? I believe that the godly crowns were actually symbolic, but the royal crowns were in fact real. But I still don't think that it was the royal crowns per se that were actually dangerous. I think that the ancient dynastic Egyptians actually found one of the headdress items of the ancients, which under certain circumstances would have been dangerous and would have done as described in the myth. And it stuck, so that they claimed that their crown effectively did the same thing. So whether it was the red crown, the white crown, or any of the other royal crowns worn by the dynastic Egyptians, I think that they were in fact beautifully crafted, very delicate items, and I based that on a dream that I had. In that dream, I was watching someone make a white crown, and they had this cone shape, not quite the same shape as a white crown, which I know that sounds a bit weird. It's a bit like a last that a cobbler uses to make shoes. So this was a stone item, and it looked like a cone, really, a fairly plain cone. And they used some kind of gum, and they put it right at the top of this cone. And then they had what I believe must be papyrus, but it looked pretty much like just strips of, very, very thin strips of some kind of, well, weaving stuff, which, as I said, I think probably was papyrus. And they laid it out crisscross right on the top of this cone thing. Then they started weaving with it, and they weaved all over this stone cone until they had completely covered the cone. And then they did this beautiful edging around the base of this weaving thing. And the end result of that was this tall looking woven hat. But that's not how it ended up, because what happened next was they took what looked like white paint, and I don't know, maybe it was some kind of plaster, and they kind of painted it on this stuff that they'd woven, and it was kind of wet and a bit, mushy, and they molded it, and they put it on someone's head and just continued shaping it until it was, absolutely perfect. I don't actually know what that paste was that they made the crown from, but I do suspect that it was reasonably combustible, because at the end of the reign of any pharaoh, one of the ceremonies that they had was the burning of the crown. So it meant that it was a demonstration that that era was over and a new one was starting. And I don't know if that's in the history books or anything, but it was definitely in one of my weird dreams. And it seems like a pretty simple sort of concept. This, to some extent, does answer part of the question as to why they have never been found. It's because so many of them were, in fact, burnt. But that doesn't provide the answer for all of them. But a pharaoh wouldn't have just had the one crown. In fact, over a pharaoh's reign, they might have had many crowns. So, why were no crowns ever found? Well, when it comes to the crowns of the gods, they weren't found because they were symbolic. Hence, they never actually existed. When it comes to the crowns of the dynastic Egyptians, they were delicate. They were something that was created very specifically for one person, and they were made in such a way that they would have disintegrated fairly easily. So that's the reason I don't think they exist today. But I do think that they were definitely exactly as they show them on the statues and the depictions on all the walls.